Hello, thank you for joining today's webinar. Today's topic is file shares, how to make file shares governance ready. This is sponsored by Index Engines. My name is Jim McGann. I'm VP of Marketing here at Index Engines, and I will be your presenter today. If you do have questions, you can type them in the chat area on the side of your screen there, and we will try to take them throughout the session. If you don't have time during the session, we'll answer them after the session is over. Also, my email address is there, and I'll put it up at the end. Feel free to shoot an email directly, and we can address it afterwards, one-on-one. So let's get started. So for those of you that do not know Index Engines, we are a software company. We're focused on enterprise-class data governance. It's really typically work with customers that really need to support regulatory, legal, e-discovery requirements and manage data more effectively. The unique attribute to the Index Engines solution is that it is purpose-built. It is built from the ground up using our own technology. We don't use open source or third-party technology, designed for very high-speed, efficient indexing for global data centers. It's very scalable. We have customers that process 10 terabytes. We have customers that process 10 plus petabytes. So it's very scalable across the board. And focuses on unstructured files and email. The most unique aspect to what we do at Index Engines is provide a solution that supports both your primary network data and file shares, as well as backup data sources. Today we're talking mostly about primary data, but we can support the same capabilities we're discussing today across your backup data sets, whether it be on tape or disk-based backups. So we have been in business since 2004. We have a number of key partners on the IT side. Dell EMC and Amazon AWS provide our solutions, as well as on the governance side, we have governance-focused partners for customers that really need advisory assistance. And these include Ernst & Young, FTI, Deloitte, and others. Our clients range from large financial services firms like Barclays, Citi, state governments, Department of Justice, government agencies, healthcare, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, a wide spectrum of organizations, all that have regulatory requirements for unstructured data. So why manage data? I mean, a lot of organizations, feel that business as usual or the status quo is good enough. I think what we're seeing in terms of our customers is that they're struggling with constant storage capacity upgrades. I was speaking with a customer the other day that says, they have a very difficult time just procuring new storage. It's not only the funding of it, but also getting it set up in the data center. There's just really no room. So the constant storage capacity upgrades is really a reason to manage data more effectively. Not as much the driver in terms of what we're seeing out there. Customers really just continue to do the upgrades and ignore that growth. But what we're seeing now in the age of consolidations, migrations, cloud tiering, for example, migration to Office 365, is that as a chance to really manage data differently. So we're seeing those as being business drivers for customers taking on a new unstructured data strategy. The main driver, however, is data governance. So regulations such as the privacy regulations that the EU is facing, known as the EU GDPR or General Data Protection Regulation, data breaches and all sorts of activity that are resulting from sensitive data being managed ineffectively. So that's really kind of what's driving the data management revolution that we're seeing today. Gartner is a advisory firm. They follow Index Engines. They recommend Index Engines. There's a fairly recent paper out, which is the Market Guide for File Analysis, which was released in 2016. A new one was just released last week. But they really talk about the uncontrolled data growth and the challenges that customers have. And for each paper that Gartner puts out, they typically put 5 recommendations on their best practices. And these recommendations line up with what we're speaking about today. But their recommendations are really, reduce the risk and inefficiencies in unstructured data. Pretty general. They get a little bit more specific, talking about managed data in line with governance and policies. definitely a requirement we're seeing today. They're also recommending optimizing the data management and storage infrastructure. I think the benefits of reclaiming storage capacity, tiering data to less expensive or less complex storage environments, definitely a good strategy. Provide better access. So a lot of the customers we talk to, struggle with getting access to data as it ages. So finding old intellectual property or research and so on, and getting access to that, so it really allows your users to really get to the job at hand and not worry about finding all that intellectual property. And then finally, facilitating business use of data that's been deemed dark. We have customers that are engineering organizations, for example, that are looking up and finding old engineering documents that have value for the organization. So Gartner's recommendations, 5 of them here, around what they call file analysis, which is really data classification, data management, which is what we're talking about today. Getting to index engines, we are a enterprise class unstructured data management and governance solution. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key attributes is that it was architected, and purpose-built to support large-scale, complex data centers. So when we go head-to-head against other solutions that exist in the market, we're more than 5 times faster than others. That goes up to much larger numbers, but being conservative, 5 times faster. So we've had projects that I'll talk about a little further in, where other solutions have tried to just index the data and have failed after months and months of trying, where we come in and after weeks are successful. So the 3 things that are key use cases for the index engine solution in the data center is data minimization. So as you can imagine, a lot of data that sits on the network, whether you have 10 terabytes or whether you have 10 petabytes, is aged, outdated, has outlived its business value, and really may not be of interest any longer to keep on primary storage. We typically see, in terms of metrics, we typically see customers reducing their storage footprint upwards of 40%. So if you look at 40%, some customers can go up 50 or 60%. But if you look at those percentages and the cost of managing that storage, you can see the payback here is significant. The second area is intelligent migration. And why do we call it intelligent? Because it's different from typical migration solutions that are really kind of just lift and load technologies that will lift it from one platform and move it to the new platform. This is a solution that will intelligently classify, profile the data on primary storage, determine what has value and where it should be, and migrate it to the right location. So you can look at 100 terabytes of storage and say, a portion of that's going to go to the cloud, a portion of that could be defensively deleted, a portion of that's going to go to a new storage tier, some of that's going to go to a secure archive, and you can make those decisions by doing an analysis or classification of the data. And finally, governance. So governance is about finding and securing sensitive content and supporting regulatory policies. So we have a lot of use cases, especially now in the age of these new privacy regulations, that are really taking hold here and changing the strategies that organizations have on how they deal with long-term retention and archiving strategies. So I'm not really going to talk in detail about the technology. This is really talking more about workflow. But for the one slide that I have here, we're very proud of the technology that's been built with index engines. It really is unique. It stands above anything that's out there in the market today. We have competitors that can index, maybe a terabyte or a few terabytes of data, and then they max out or require additional servers or dozens of servers. With index engines, using a single server, we can support large-scale environments. So it is architected to support petabyte-class environments, as I said, supports federation for distributed environments or larger scale environments. It has very high-speed indexing solution. And we support all classes of data, including legacy backup data on tape or disk. So if you want a single view into your unstructured data assets that exist both online on file shares as well as offline, index engines is the only solution that could provide that capability. Beyond the indexing, there's comprehensive search and reporting built in, which I'll show you. integrated management and disposition of the files and email. Integrated archiving, it comes with the product, secure archiving to support any preservation or long-term retention requirements. And then a lot of automation is built into the system. So as you know, the unstructured data environment is a living, breathing environment. So keeping the automation or the rules running on a continual basis will allow for data to be managed and cleaned constantly. One of the stories here that shows you some of the strength of Index Engine solution. This is obviously a very large scale environment. This is an electronics manufacturer. Not everybody has this much data, but to know that this capability, the processing power is available for all size companies is important. They are an environment that have about 50 petabytes of unstructured data. They initiated an initial project on 2.5 petabytes of this data to do a pilot. It was done with a partner of Index Engine, a global advisory firm, and their goal was really to understand what exists. As many organizations, or basically every organization knows, the unstructured data environment hasn't been managed. It's just that unstructured. So the ability to understand what exists, why it exists, where it is, who owns it, are people using it, does it have value, all those questions, and then get it where it needs to be, whether it be on-prem, off-prem, in the cloud, deleted in some cases, but just really take back control of this data. So their environment, they had about 2.5 petabytes of data. It was distributed across about a dozen NetApp filers. It was about 11.5 billion files. And just to see, to understand that customers really have no insight into the data, they were asked early on, how much data do you think is out there? And their estimate was about 500 million or 500 million files. It turns out to be 11 billion files, so significantly off in terms of their estimates. So they had tried a number of different solutions here and months and months and months of processing and really gave up. So when Index Engine came in, the installation required 6 virtual servers, very easy to deploy, no agents, no copying of the data, no moving of the data. It's data indexing data in place very efficiently. So with 6 servers, 5 weeks of metadata indexing, which was unprecedented. They had spent months and months, over 5 months, trying to get this indexed and failed. So the Index Engine's indexing speed was about 100 terabytes of indexing per day. And that was a throttle number just because they didn't want to impact the servers as aggressively. So their initial results here, in looking at the data, was very interesting. They found that there was about 600 terabytes of log files, just tiny 1K log files, just tons and tons of them, that had no value, that could easily be purged. They should have been purged. The application didn't purge them. And then another 400 terabytes of age data that they could purge. So between that, they reclaimed almost half of that capacity. About a petabyte of data was reclaimed. Very happy. CIO said it's a very successful project. They will move on from the 2.5 petabytes to process the 50 petabytes. So in terms of the Index Engine solution, we talk here about workflow. What is the workflow to really do 3 phases? The first phase is data classification. That's the know it phase, to know what you have. Second phase is data management. That's to get it where it needs to be. And the third phase is governance, to really govern it according to your regulatory policies. So if you look at this wheel, this is a workflow wheel, really. In the green section is all about indexing. Obviously, the indexing is the means to an end. It's the processing of data so you can search and report and classify it. Once data is indexed, it can be classified. And this first phase is a phase that typically customers do early on, obviously, to really get an understanding of the data so they could develop their data policies. The next phase is the management. And a lot of customers go through data minimization, which is cleanup, reclaiming storage capacity, getting rid of aged data that has no value. Ongoing management, support defensible disposition, get it where it needs to be. And then the third phase, which is really on the governance side, is search. Find sensitive content and old intellectual property, and continue to monitor the data and make sure it follows your current data policies. So simple workflow, simple process. Customers doing this every day to be able to just manage data significantly more effectively than they have in the past. So the first phase is indexing. So you can see here some of the screenshots. Today we're not going to have time to do a demo. Happy to do one in the future, but you'll see screenshots here that talk about the indexing process. Again, very high-speed indexing, fastest on the market today, reaching speeds up to a terabyte per hour per node. It is agentless, so other solutions require desktop or server agents. Index Engines does not. It performs in-place indexing, either metadata or full content. Typically, you would do a metadata pass initially to do a classification on the data, and then determine what data you need full content indexing, and that could be easily accomplished. So again, it's very compressed indexing platform. By indexing at a metadata level, the index footprint, which is the size of the index compared to the original data source, is about 1%, full content about 5%. So it's a very efficient, very high speed, very comprehensive indexing solution. The next phase is classification. So classification is the ability to use reporting and reporting on things like dates, access date, create date, modify date, data types, data host, data size, finding redundant, obsolete, trivial data or rot data. So different integrations or different classification rules that are built in, all can be customized based on your needs. Index Engines also integrates with Active Directory, so you can report on group membership. So show me all data owned by members of the finance team or the HR team or so on. So you can see some sample reports. Index Engines works two ways in terms of reporting. Index Engines has its own reporting capabilities built into the platform. A lot of organizations also use third-party reporting platforms. So this is a sample of a third-party report screen. Let me blow that up a bit. But you can see some sample reports. This is metadata-only classification. So you can look at classification by department. So here you can see legal, marketing, finance, the breakdown of data by percentage, by capacity, by number of files. Some customers use this for chargebacks. So you can go back and charge back these different departments by server or file share usage. So you can see just different ways to look at the data. Another view is abandoned data. So what is abandoned data? Because we integrate to Active Directory, you can say, show me all either inactive users or ex-employees. And find the inactive users. These are people no longer with the organization. And look at their data in terms of data that has not been accessed in more than a year. So it's owned by an ex-employee and no one's accessing it, meaning it's abandoned. Or data that is owned by an ex-employee and has been accessed in the past year. That means that it does have value. Current employees are still using it. So interesting view into the data. Email audit, find PSTs on the network, who owns them by department, what's the location of the PSTs, when were they last accessed, and so on. Active data, find data that's been accessed by department. You'll find that the active data is far less than you think it is, typically in the area of 15 to 25% or so of active data. So knowing where that is and how often it's being used and who's using it is of value, so it can be monitored. And finally, rot analysis. That's looking at your redundant, obsolete, trivial content. So when Index Engines indexes the data, it does create document signatures of the files. So you can say how much redundancy exists. So here you can see the HR department has a large volume of redundant data. Obsolete data by last accessed, or trivial data by file type, like logs files, photos, iTunes libraries, movie files, things like that. So with a dashboard like this, you really come a long way in becoming governance ready. You really become a long way in understanding what exists in your data environment. So moving on into data minimization, that's cleanup. I think if you clean up, ROT, the redundant, obsolete, trivial content, which is non-controversial, you can reclaim up to upwards of 40% of your total capacity. I think, in terms of, acquiring solutions like Index Engines, even if it's not budgeted, you can prove out a ROI that will show the payback and actual cost savings of these deployments. So an example here, if you look at a 500 terabyte example, and you look at business as usual versus the transformed environment, and the transformed environment is migrating data based on intelligence or based on value to external sources like the cloud that are much more cheaper versus keeping it on-prem. I'm using a Gartner recommendation here, a number saying that a fully loaded cost of a petabyte of storage is about $1.6 million a year. So if I look at the classification models that I've been talking about, and I look at active data being 22% or about 110 terabytes, that will remain in place and just continue to be monitored. Inactive data, stuff that's not being used, move it out to low-cost cloud storage. So that could be 150 terabytes there. Sensitive data, which may be PSTs or Word docs or spreadsheets owned by the finance team, put it into an archive for legal review or legal hold or long-term retention, and that could exist in the cloud. And then rot data is either move it to cold storage or delete it. Basically, the cold storage costs are very minimal, so deleting it is as good as moving it to not much better than moving it to cold storage actually, but there's about 200 terabytes. So you can see using that $1.6 million a year for fully loaded costs. In the case of half a petabyte, we're at $800,000 a year, business as usual. The transformed environment using standard cloud costs reduces the total cost significantly from $800,000 to about $222,000 annually. So over 3 years, you have over $1 million, almost $2 million cost savings. So the ROI of this is compelling, and this will help pay for a lot of technology to help get a hold and understanding of your unstructured data assets. So the next phase of management, once you classify the data, how do you manage it? So Index Engines has fully integrated management capabilities within the interface in order to migrate data, copy data, delete data, or continue to monitor data. All processing of the data or disposition is done in a defensible fashion, meaning that as a user logs into Index Engines to migrate or delete data, that will be logged in the database saying on this day, John Doe logged into the system and deleted these files or migrated these files. So creating defensible audit trails is important for governance readiness. In addition to the disposition, there is integrated archiving. So if you wanted to just preserve data in a secure environment or maybe a secure disk location or cloud location, that can be done as well. So within the interface you see here, you can see listings of files based on queries and searches and reports, and then the actions taking here. In this case, this is a deletion action. You could archive them, you can migrate them, or so on. Finally, moving into the search space, so there's full search. So in the first phase, you're doing metadata analysis or metadata indexing of the content. There may be a subset of data, maybe documents owned by the legal team, that you want to turn on or rescan for full content indexing. That's as easy as a click of the button. So by doing full content, you would go inside the files and emails to find keywords. You can find search by keyword search, Boolean search, pattern search, regular expression search. We've also added conceptual search. Conceptual search uses machine learning algorithms to be able to find similar documents. So you can train the Index Engine system to show me all documents that are similar to these 50 contracts. And Index Engines will use the power of the query or the conceptual query to go and find those similar documents. So this is commonly used to support legal, e-discovery, regulatory requests. So for GDPR, the GDPR regulation, this is obviously very key to find personal data and to manage it according to the regulation. You can see here, if I have this blown up, I do have this blown up here, a more detailed chart, kind of looking at more detailed views in the data. This is a sunburst chart, looking at more of analysis of the rot data, finding, what the trivial data looks like, what the obsolete data looks like, and then kind of classifying data by, in this case, this is out of scope for their regulation. So these are files or locations or types of files that don't have any regulatory requirements, and then in scope for the regulation. So within the management team, all files are in scope. Within the sales team, contracts and proposals are in scope. So kind of creating a electronic data map that'll help organizations to really understand what they have and where is the personal content. Some other views is types of personal data, so which types of users, prospects, partners, customers, and so on. And then looking at personal data by department, so bank routing numbers, tax ID numbers, passports, country IDs, mostly contained in the HR department. So being able to do these tree maps or these sunburst charts that are used using, this is can be used through Excel or things like Tableau or other reporting tools. You can get really detailed analytics on your data environment. And finally, monitoring. So everything you can do in terms of query, reports, and so on can be stored in the system and run on a scheduled basis. So you have automation built in to be able to monitor the content as it changes. You can see some dashboards. This is actually the Index Engines interface. These dashboards have been set up. And some of the other interesting attributes that Index Engines can index as well is activity logs. So you can say, find me all data, all spreadsheets owned by members of the finance team, and show me users not members of the finance team that have been accessing these files. So you may be able to find that maybe John Doe, that's a mailroom clerk, is accessing many legal spreadsheets where they should not be. The other issue is ACLs, or activity access control lists. So what files are sensitive out there? So it could again be these spreadsheets owned by members of the finance team. Show me which users have read, write, browse permission to those, and you can clean up any kind of security flaws and perform a security audit to proactively, proactively manage data more effectively. So that's it. That's all we have today. We're at 30 minutes. That was my goal for today, to keep it to half an hour. So I'm not going to have any time for questions, but if you do have questions, I will give you my email address at the end here. And feel free to shoot out an email. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. But an easy way to get started is we do have a governance-ready starter bundle. It includes services from our experts that know how to use the Index Engine solution, as well as the software. And this is a 3-month license. So to get started, it's not, it's not the beginning and the end. It's just the starting point. And after this 3-month program, then the software could be licensed for longer term. But you can see there's 3 options, small, medium, and large, up to 50 terabytes, 100 terabytes, 250 terabytes, low price points to get started. And in this case, Index Engines will work with you in a remote basis. So we'll tie into a remote server, work with you to set it up, deploy the system, and then install the software, get it set up, start the monitoring, work with you on reports and consultation, and then wrap up the project and build a recommendation for next steps on where you go from here. So a lot of organizations either don't have the resources or the know-how internally to get one of these programs kick-started. This is kind of a kickstart program that will get you going and allow you to really see the effectiveness of the Index Engine solution firsthand. So that's pretty much it. The email address, so if you send it to info, it'll get to the right people. But really, get going and start small. Build a governance-ready program by working at a small volume of data, see the results, see the success, and grow from there. And by doing that and educating your management team or the people that are funding these activities, they'll see the payback on the solution. We do have other partners that can help you. We can help you with our services. We also have advisory partners. We can connect you to the right folks at Gartner to get insight into the Index Engine solution. Either way, reach out to us, and we're happy to work with you in getting started on your governance readiness program. Again, a little bit over time today, but thank you for your attention, and we look forward to working with you in the future. And that concludes our session today.